Everyone was evacuated from Chernobyl in 1986. So why does this logbook have entries from 3 weeks later? On April 27, 1986, approximately 49,000 residents of Pripyat, Ukraine, were loaded onto buses. They were told the evacuation was temporary. 3 days, maybe. Bring your documents, some food, a change of clothes. Leave everything else. The entire city was emptied in under 3.5 hours. It remains one of the fastest mass evacuations in human history. Every man, woman, and child, gone. The roads out of the city clogged with buses stretching toward the horizon, while behind them, reactor number 4 continued to burn, bleeding invisible poison into the sky. That is the story the world knows. That is the story the Soviet Union permitted the world to know. But in February of 2023, a small group of urban explorers entered the Chernobyl exclusion zone with a purpose that went beyond the usual decay tourism. They weren't there to photograph peeling wallpaper or rusted Ferris wheels. They had a target. A building on the eastern edge of Pripyat's industrial district that, for decades, had attracted a very specific kind of curiosity. A building whose official history never quite matched the whispers that surrounded it. The Jupiter Factory. If you look up the Jupiter Factory in any standard reference, you'll find a straightforward entry. It was a consumer electronics plant. It manufactured reel-to-reel tape recorders, semiconductors, basic radio components. Nothing remarkable. Nothing worth remembering. And that, in itself, should be your first red flag. Because in the Soviet Union, the most boring explanation was almost always the one that had been carefully constructed to stop you from asking further questions. Former workers, the few who have spoken publicly, have described entire floors of the Jupiter factory that ordinary employees were never permitted to access. Military personnel were seen entering and exiting through separate entrances. Shipments arrived in unmarked vehicles and left under armed escort. For a factory supposedly assembling consumer tape recorders, there was an unusual amount of security. An unusual amount of secrecy. An unusual amount of interest from agencies whose names most Soviet citizens knew better than to speak aloud. The explorers, who have asked to remain anonymous, and whose identities I will respect for reasons that will become clear, had been researching the Jupiter factory for over a year before their expedition. They had studied declassified Soviet industrial documents, cross-referenced floor plans with satellite imagery, and identified a discrepancy. The building's external footprint suggested a lower level that did not appear on any publicly available schematic. A sub-basement. Sealed off. Unacknowledged. And, as far as anyone could tell, untouched since 1986. They found the access point behind a collapsed section of the factory's eastern loading dock. A steel door, corroded but intact, hidden behind decades of debris. It took them nearly 2 hours to clear enough rubble to reach it. The door itself was not merely closed. It had been welded shut. Someone, at some point, had taken the time to ensure that what was behind this door would stay behind this door. The explorers used a portable angle grinder to cut through the weld seam. And when the door finally swung open, the air that came out was stale in a way that they later described as wrong. Not just old. Pressurized. As though the room beyond had been hermetically sealed. What they found inside should not have been there. The sub-basement consisted of a long corridor that branched into 3 separate rooms. The first room contained 12 military-style cots, arranged in 2 rows of 6. Each cot had a thin mattress, a wool blanket folded at the foot, and beneath each one, a small metal container of personal effects. Razors. Toothbrushes. Packs of Soviet-era cigarettes, the brand, Cosmos, still partially legible on the crumbling packaging. Clothing. Framed photographs of families. These were not the belongings of people passing through. These were the belongings of people who were living here. The second room appeared to have been a workspace. Metal shelving lined the walls, and on those shelves sat rows of electronic equipment, oscilloscopes, signal analyzers, devices the explorers could not immediately identify. Some of this equipment bore military serial number designations that, when later researched, did not correspond to any known procurement records. At the center of the room, a large table was covered in technical drawings and schematics. Most had been rendered illegible by time and moisture, but a few fragments remained readable. They appeared to depict some kind of radio frequency apparatus, though its purpose was unclear. And then there was the third room. This was the smallest of the three, barely larger than a closet. Inside, on a metal shelf bolted to the wall, they found a single object that would become the center of everything that followed. A logbook. Hardbound. Military issue. The kind used for official records in Soviet-era installations. Its cover was stamped with a designation the explorers did not recognize, a series of Cyrillic characters followed by a numerical code that, despite extensive searching, has never been matched to any known Soviet military project. The logbook contained entries written in at least two different hands. The entries were dated. And this is where the ground falls away beneath your feet. The first entry was dated April 28, 1986. One day after the evacuation of Pripyat. The last entry was dated May 19, 1986. 22 days after every living soul was supposed to have left this city. For 22 days, someone was still in Pripyat. Someone was still in this building. Someone was living in this sealed basement, surrounded by radioactive fallout that was making the city above them one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Here are the 5 details from that logbook that no one has been able to explain. 1. The entries reference daily shortwave radio contact with an external party, designated only by a call sign. The call sign does not match any known Soviet military or civilian radio station. But the entries suggest whoever was on the other end was issuing instructions. Specific technical instructions. Whatever work was being done in that second room did not stop when the evacuation happened. It continued. 2. Several entries referenced dosimeter readings taken at regular intervals. The authors of the logbook were monitoring their own radiation exposure. They were aware of the danger. They knew what was happening above them. And they stayed anyway. Or they were made to stay. 3. An entry dated May 7 notes the arrival of, and I am translating loosely here, replacement provisions via the service tunnel. Service tunnel. There is no service tunnel on any known schematic of the Jupiter factory. But this entry suggests there was a way in and out of this sub-basement that did not require passing through the factory above. Someone was supplying these people. Someone with access to the exclusion zone. Someone who knew they were down there. 4. The entry dated May 14 is different from the others. The handwriting changes. Becomes erratic. The author writes about hearing sounds from the floors above, not the sounds of an empty building settling, but footsteps. Measured, deliberate footsteps. The entry ends with a single line that I will translate as closely as I can: we have been instructed not to investigate. We have been instructed to continue. 5. The final entry. May 19. It is the shortest in the entire logbook. It consists of only 6 words, written in a hand so unsteady that the explorers initially couldn't read it. When they finally deciphered it, what it said was this: relieved of duty. Door sealed. Forgive. Forgive. Not forgive me. Not forgive us. Just forgive. As though the word itself was enough. As though whoever wrote it knew there was nothing else to say. The explorers filmed everything. Over 90 minutes of footage. They documented the cots, the equipment, the logbook, the personal belongings. They were meticulous. They understood the significance of what they had found. When they returned from the exclusion zone, they uploaded a condensed version of their footage to YouTube, roughly 20 minutes, with commentary and translation overlays. Within 48 hours, the video was hit with a DMCA takedown notice. This is where the story turns from historically disturbing to actively unsettling. DMCA notices are copyright claims. They are filed by rights holders, studios, music labels, media companies. They are not typically filed against footage of abandoned Soviet factories filmed by urban explorers using their own cameras. And yet someone filed one. The claimant name on the notice was, according to the explorers, a company they could not find any registration for. A company that, as far as they could determine, does not exist. A ghost entity, created for the sole purpose of removing this video from the internet. The explorers attempted to re-upload the footage. It was removed again. They tried a third platform. Same result. They began receiving messages, not threats, exactly, but contacts from individuals claiming to represent various organizations, suggesting that the footage depicted sensitive material, and that its distribution could have legal consequences. None of these individuals identified their organizations by name. As of the recording of this video, no Ukrainian government body has issued any statement regarding the Jupiter factory subbasement. No historical agency has acknowledged the logbook. No military archive has confirmed or denied the existence of a crew station beneath the factory after the evacuation. The silence is total. And silence, when it comes from governments, is never empty. Silence is a shape. It has edges. And if you trace those edges carefully enough, you begin to see the outline of what is being concealed. Consider what we know. The Jupiter factory was almost certainly a dual-use facility, consumer electronics as a cover for classified military work. This is not speculation. This aligns with well-documented Soviet practices across dozens of similar installations. The sub-basement was purpose-built, sealed, and self-contained. It had provisions for extended habitation. It had its own supply route. Whatever was happening down there was considered important enough to continue even as the worst nuclear disaster in history unfolded directly above. Now consider the timing. April 26, 1986. Reactor 4 explodes. Within hours, the Soviet military establishes a perimeter. Within a day, the evacuation begins. In the chaos, in the radiation, in the panic, someone made the decision that a small team of people would remain underground in the Jupiter factory. Someone weighed the value of their work against their lives and decided the work was more important. Who were they? The logbook gives us no names. The personal effects beneath the cots are generic, nothing that could identify an individual. The photographs found among the belongings show families, children, homes, but no faces have been matched to any known person. These people, whoever they were, have been erased. Not just from the building. From the record. From history itself. And that final entry. Relieved of duty. Door sealed. Forgive. Relieved of duty suggests they were eventually extracted. Someone came for them. But the door was sealed from the outside, welded shut, remember. That means after the last person left, someone closed that door and made sure it could never be opened from within. They weren't just leaving. They were burying the evidence of anyone ever having been there at all. But here is what I keep returning to. What I cannot stop thinking about. The logbook was left behind. Everything else was sanitized, methodical, thorough. The cots could belong to anyone. The equipment is generic enough. But the logbook, with its dates, its references, its final desperate entry, was left on that shelf. Was it an oversight? Was it intentional? Did someone leave it there on purpose, knowing that someday, decades later, someone would cut through that welded door and find it? Was the logbook the only way these people could ensure the world would eventually know they existed? There are 37 years of silence sealed in that room. 37 years of dust settling on cots where people slept while radiation seeped through the soil above them. 37 years of a logbook sitting on a shelf in the dark, holding the words of people whose names we may never know, people who were asked to stay behind in a dead city and keep working while the world moved on without them. The Ukrainian government has said nothing. The footage has been scrubbed from every platform it was uploaded to. The explorers have gone quiet, declining further interviews, declining to share the raw footage. And somewhere in Pripyat, in a building the world was told made tape recorders, there is a basement that has been resealed. The door has been welded shut again. I confirmed this through satellite imagery comparisons and contacts within the exploration community. Someone went back. Someone closed that door a second time. Whatever secret was kept in that basement in 1986 is still being kept today. So I leave this with you. Who were those people? What were they working on that was worth more than their safety, more than their lives? Who gave the order to leave them behind? And why, 37 years later, is someone still making sure this story stays buried? What do you think really happened beneath the Jupiter factory? Leave your theory below.